This might be the one that gets me kicked off this platform. So I'm going to be graphic. It is what it is. Let's talk. Because this week something happened that took us about 400 years to get to. And before I tell you what was said, I need to tell you what was being named. Because this is the part that never gets said with the weight that it deserves. Before a single ship left the coast of West Africa, the people who were going to be put on it were already being processed, stripped naked, prodded, groped. Traders invasively examined the breast, buttocks, and vaginal areas of women and girls, allegedly to assess their childbearing ability. Men and boys were groped around the groin, scrotum, and anus. One white trafficker who later testified described the process as similar to what you would do to a horse before purchasing it. These were human beings, y'all. They were being evaluated the way that you would evaluate livestock. And when the evaluation was done, they were assigned a number, not a name, a number, and loaded onto ships. These ships were built into two categories, tight packers and loose packers. Tight packers maximized profit. Human beings were measured with instruments with charts to calculate how many bodies could be chained in a single row. The space allocated per person was roughly the size of a coffin. Men were shackled together in pairs at the wrists and ankles and packed into the hold lying on their sides, unable to sit up, unable to turn over, unable to move. The heat in the hold was lethal and suffocating. There was almost no ventilation. The air was so thick with human waste, sweat, and disease that sailors reported being unable to breathe when they opened the hatch. Dysentery tore through entire decks. People vomited on each other. People had diarrhea on each other. People died chained to the person beside them and stayed there, rotting, until someone came to remove the body. Sometimes that took days. Smallpox spread. Measles spread. The living were chained to the dead in spaces the size of coffins, in heat that historians describe as suffocating and unbearable. In the middle of the ocean, women were kept unchained in separate compartments, not as mercy, but because being unchained made them easier to access. Crew members raped them throughout the voyage, not occasionally, routinely. Those who resisted were flogged. Women gave birth on those ships, without medical care, without assistance. In those conditions, most newborns didn't survive. In one documented case, a captain punished a failed rebellion by killing one of the men involved immediately and forcing two other enslaved people to eat his heart and liver, while the rest watched. This is in the historical record, y'all. It is documented in historical accounts of the Middle Passage. About 15% of the people put on those ships, nearly 2 million human beings died before they reached land. They were thrown overboard, and some were thrown overboard alive, because maritime insurance paid for cargo lost at sea, not cargo that died of illness. Throwing people into the ocean alive was more profitable than letting them die of disease. The most documented case is the Zong Massacre of 1781, in which a British captain threw 132 enslaved people into the ocean alive and filed an insurance claim. The case went to court. The question before the court wasn't whether a crime had been committed, though. The question was whether the insurance policy covered the loss. The ones who survived the crossing arrived at a port and then were processed again. Before they were sold, their skin was rubbed with oil to disguise cracking and lesions. Their heads were sometimes shaved to remove gray hairs and bacteria, to make them look younger and healthier than they actually were. They were examined again by buyers, poked, prodded, molested. George Washington, who would become the first president of the United States, specified in writing in 1772 that he preferred enslaved people not exceeding 20 years of age. He was placing an order for human beings, like you would place an order for food. And the ones who were purchased were put to work. About 80% of enslaved Africans transported across the Middle Passage ended up on sugar plantations in South America and the Caribbean, where the mortality rate was so high that the entire enslaved population had to be continuously replaced through the ongoing slave trade. People worked from before dawn until after dark, in gangs, cutting sugarcane in tropical heat, feeding it into mills regularly to fingers, hands, and arms. Life expectancy on a sugar plantation was measured in years, not decades. The system consumed people. That was the model. You work them to death and then you buy more. In the United States, enslaved people were raped systematically by the men who owned them, by overseers, by anyone the law permitted. And when those rapes produced children, those children were born enslaved. The enslaver's blood ran through the veins of the people that he owned. Families were deliberately separated at auction. Children sold away from mothers, husbands sold away from wives, with the specific intention that they would never find each other again. Their languages were criminalized. Their religions were outlawed. Their names were replaced with the names of the men who owned them. Reading and writing were made illegal. The systematic destruction of identity, culture, language, family, and humanity was not incidental to the system. It was the system. You can't enslave a person that knows who they are. So they made sure people didn't know. This ran for 400 years. The records are a little fuzzy, but between 12 and 14 million people were stolen from Africa. Nearly 2 million died on the crossing. Tens of millions more were born into slavery in the Americas. The wealth generated by their labor built banking systems, the insurance industries, the textile industries, and the national economies of Britain, Spain, France, Portugal, the Netherlands, and the United States. That wealth was inherited. It was compounded. It is still here. When Britain abolished slavery in 1833, the government paid £20 million in compensation, equivalent to about £2 billion today. That money went to the enslavers, not to the enslaved. British taxpayers were paying off that debt until 2015. Lloyd's of London, which insured slave ships throughout the trade, they formally acknowledged the history and apologized for it. But the wealth didn't disappear. It compounded. The cotton that enslaved people picked in Mississippi in 1850, it built the textile industry that funded the Industrial Revolution. None of that wealth was ever returned. And when it was over, the men who built all of that wrote the history books. They named the streets after themselves, built monuments to the men that tried to keep it going, taught children that it was a tragedy of its time, something complicated, something to understand in context, you know? This week, 123 countries stood up at the United Nations and said, no, we see it, we name it. The gravest crime in the history of humanity. And I keep thinking about the people that never got to hear that. The people who died carrying the truth of this in their bodies, with the world's silence pressing down on top of it. Our ancestors knew exactly what it was. They lived it and the world looked away. That's not a small thing to finally name. Now let's talk about who refused to name it. 3 countries out of 193. The United States, Israel, and Argentina. 3 countries looked at a non-binding statement. Not a reparations check, not a court summons, not a single dollar changing hands, not one person facing any kind of consequences, just a formal moral acknowledgement that this happened and that it was the worst, and voted no. They voted no. And the argument this country made is one of the most clarifying things they've said in years. The U.S. Deputy Ambassador stood up in that hall and said, the United States does not recognize a legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time they occurred. They built the legal system that made all of that legal. They wrote those laws. They enforced them. They sent men with guns to drag the people back that survived long enough to escape. They fought a war. Hundreds of thousands of people died, specifically to keep those laws in place. And now they're sitting behind those same laws as their defense, as proof that they don't owe anything. The country that engineered the legal architecture of chattel slavery is using that same architecture like a shield. That's a confession if I've ever heard one. And then there's Europe. Europe didn't vote no. They abstained. And I want you to hear what Europe said in order to explain that. The European Union said that they couldn't support the resolution because the word gravest implies a hierarchy amongst atrocity crimes, and no legal hierarchy between crimes exists. The country that designed ships specifically engineered to maximize the number of human bodies that you could pack into a hull, that built the plantation economies that made European aristocratic families wealthy for 10 generations and counting, that colonized an entire continent and drew its borders at a conference in Berlin in 1884, where not a single African person was present, that extracted the gold, the diamonds, the rubber, the copper, the people for 100 years. And they're still sitting with that wealth in 2026, had concerns about an adjective, not the 2 million people thrown into the ocean, not the women raped on those ships, not the children sold at auction, the word used to describe all of it. The Netherlands is the only country in the world that's ever formally apologized for its role in the slave trade. One out of every nation that participated. One apology in the entire history of the Western world. But look at who said yes, right? 132 countries, the entire African continent, the Caribbean, Latin America, most of Asia, the global South. The people who know from their blood and their bones what it means to be on the receiving end of that power. They didn't hesitate. They didn't debate language. They didn't have concerns about adjectives. They called it what it is without flinching, without qualifying, without apologizing for the clarity of it all. And for the first time in the history of international law, it's on the record. What happened to African people wasn't complicated. It wasn't a product of its time. It wasn't something we need to understand in context. It was the worst thing human beings have ever done to each other. 123 names on it. So let me be clear about what this week was and what it wasn't. It wasn't justice. It wasn't reparations. It wasn't accountability. No one's going to prison. No check is being written. No land is being returned. No wealth redistributed. It was 123 countries agreeing on a word, a non-binding word, and even then it was too much for some people. But that word, after 400 years of refusing to say it, is not nothing, because our ancestors carried the truth of this without anyone official ever confirming it. They knew what it was. We have always known what it is. And for generations, we were told we were exaggerating, that we needed to move on, that it was a long time ago, that people asking for acknowledgement were the problem. 3 countries said no, but 123 said yes. And the people who built this world on the bodies of our ancestors, who designed ships to fit more of them in, who rubbed oil in their skin to hide the damage before putting them on the auction block, who bred them like livestock and sold their children and raped their daughters, and then wrote history books calling it complicated, spent 400 years trying to make us forget that we were worth fighting for. This week, the world disagreed. That belongs to us. It always has. And nobody gets to take that back.
For crying out loud, how does this literally affect FBA? Why is it that these Haitian, Caribbeans, African, whatever they call themselves, if they literally did not drag FBAs into their discussion, if they literally do not drag FBA into what they want to say, if they literally do not drag Black Americans into whatsoever they are doing, it looks like it's not complete. It looks like it's not complete. Now, let it make sense to me that a woman was trying to say something that I think it was reasonable enough until she went ahead to say, what has Black American done? What have Black American, what have their country been able to contribute? First, it is a shame, a very big shame as far as I'm concerned, that in the whole wide world, it is literally now that the UN is passing that slavery is the grievous crime against humanity. That is already a shame. So if I want to be addressing issues about that, I should just speak on the knowledge I have. Why will I need to rub it on Black Americans? But anyways, what do I know? Let's watch. Credits belong to the original creators of every single clips and stitches we have in our today's episode. And guys, I want to say a very big thank you to every single one of you liking, commenting, sharing, dropping super thanks, and also joining my membership. I do not take you guys for granted. You guys are absolutely the best. With that being said, let's go watch what Madame have to say, and I'll be back with commentaries.
Hey everyone, it's me, Mambo Odette, and I'm going to tell you this. If it wasn't for African and Caribbean countries, the UN would have never recognized slavery as the greatest crime against humanity. Woo! It was the African countries that voted. It was the Caribbean countries that voted and took this to the United Nations. When have FBAs ever taken shit to the United Nations? Where is your country? Oh, your country voted not to recognize slavery as the greatest crime against humanity. Because y'all got Stockholm Syndrome. Donnie, with Stockholm Syndrome. I don't care what Haiti is. We have a voice in the United Nations. We are a country. In order to be sovereign, you need land. You need a country. How you sovereign in somebody else's shit? You not, fool. And I about had it with the nonsense. And I'm so serious. The nonsense just never stops. And it's just unbelievable. But it is a reflection of the American school district in some parts of the United States. It really is. What y'all seeing on TikTok. But you know what? The world knows that America has blood on its hands. And they spoke in the United Nations when they passed that. You understand? Now, I'm sure Israel thinks that the Holocaust is the greatest crime against humanity, but they kind of lost their reason after what they did in Palestine. You know, you can lose your reason. You can have reason, but then you can lose your reason with your own actions. You understand? When you become the monster that brutalized you, when you become worse than them, you can lose your reason. And O'Donnell with Stockholm Syndrome, he want to talk about everyone else. He want to talk about, oh, Chavez. They took down Chavez statue. He was molesting children. He was doing this. Where is your energy? Where's that same energy for what was going on with your leader, with Epstein Island? Where's that same energy? Stockholm Syndrome. I'm so glad Caribbean can stand up for the speak. I'm so glad African can stand up and speak. Everybody want to say we're this, we're that, and you ain't even got your own shit. You ain't even got a vote in the United Nations. Those who know. I'm Mambo Odette. Yay for Caribbean people.
So what does this mean for Black America? You excited about this? What exactly does it mean for Black America? How does it change the quality of our lives in America that these white majority resource poor countries are now saying what they've seen and benefited from since its inception? It's no secret. It's no secret that our ancestors were enslaved and trafficked, terrorized, tortured, forced here. And after this country had no choice but to make us citizens, then we lived under Jim Crow this entire time. These white majority resource poor countries have been watching this because they benefit from the demise of the black body. And it doesn't matter if that black body resides in America or it resides in Sudan or Congo. What does it matter for the Black American that these white majority resource poor countries are acknowledging the terror, the torture, the enslavement, the maltreatment of Black Americans when they are the terrorizers and the torturers of Congolese and Sudanese people? What does it matter? Globally, we are all we've got. Black people on this globe, we are all we've got. There is no panel of judges. There are no dignitaries or diplomats. There are no white men that are coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. And you know it. So you tell me, what exactly does this mean?
I'm seeing way too many Black Americans upset about the United Nations' most recent resolution, saying that reparations is for only Black Americans and it's lineage based. Have we lost our damn minds? When those ships left Africa, they didn't just stop in America. They went to Jamaica, the Virgin Islands, Brazil, and a couple of other places. And those people were also enslaved, not just us. So as a Black American, thank you Ghanaians for getting the world to recognize slavery as a crime against humanity, because it is. Thank you Ghanaians for getting the world to have more responsible conversations regarding reparations, because this is truly a very big step forward for the diaspora.
Look, y'all, we really got to get this in order, and we really got to get this in shape, because at the end of the day, what's really going to try to happen is they are going to try to say that the African Americans deserve reparations, and they're going to try to pay us, but they're forgetting a core factor, that they didn't bring us from no fucking Africa. We were already fucking here. So what this will do is disenfranchise us from the fucking land. Absolutely not. This is why delineation is necessity, okay? Because the African community, they deserve their own payment for the couple of people that they brought over here. Let me tell you something. The Caucasian and the Caucasus people and the French people, they could not travel across those fucking waters. Do you feel me? Do you hear me? Those waters were too thick for them to continue going back and forth. So trust me, they did not take millions of people from Africa and bring them to America. They took the people that was in America and traveled us around America. That's what they did. They did not take all those people from Africa, okay? So what this does, essentially, is they're talking about, oh, the greatest crimes. This was the transatlantic slave trade. What they are doing is they are separating us from the land, okay? Meanwhile, we were here already. So it needs to be understood that we were already here. What they did was they took us, maybe they took people from Virginia and took them down to New Orleans, or they took people from Florida and took them up to Virginia. That's what they did. They cannot come across that Atlantic back and forth like that with millions and millions of Africans. That did not happen. So, and this is why they came up later when they reclassified us multiple times. That's why they wanted to do African American, because they wanted us to not know who we are. They are trying to separate us from the land. However, when reparations comes to the indigenous Black Americans, I want land and money. I don't just put your dollar, because that motherfucker's about to be gone anyway. I want the land, bitch. Yeah. The land. And this is what I need y'all to get. Oh, y'all need to get into, man. Y'all need to get into, because this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to do another fucking ugly doke. Okay? They're trying to separate you from the land. And they're going to try to give you some dollars, but you ain't going to have no value in a couple of weeks, in a couple months anyway. The land.
And I must also speak to the member states who have not yet formally acknowledged the part their nations have played in the transatlantic slave trade. I say, in our history, your nations have acknowledged my people enough for us to be the recipient of your whip. But in our future, acknowledge us enough to be the recipient of your remorse. In history, your nations have been economical enough to assign dollar values to human life. Today and in our future, use this same economical prowess to assign dollar values to your ethical debt. I echo the Secretary General in saying that we need reparatory justice systems to move forward as a global community. This means supporting and sponsoring educational programs that tell the full and true African history. This means returning stolen goods to their rightful owners. This means putting our money where our morals are. We say we want a future of dignity and justice. An actioned acknowledgement would not bestow the Black diaspora with dignity, for that could never be taken from us. The necessary work of reparatory justice is the way these nations regain their own.
Let me address this comment directly. And if you want to see the full context of why this person commented this, as a matter of fact, I'm going to show you just a second. But if you click on the comment, you can watch the whole video. But before I get started, this is only for historical and educational purposes only. Anything I state in this video is based on historical documents that you can research yourself. Do your own research and use your own discernment. All right, so what led up to that comment? Someone asked, can you explain why Ghana wants to seek reparations on behalf of Black Americans? So you said, y'all aren't doing anything. Y'all always getting stepped on. Y'all talk too much, and someone had to do it. And that right there tells me you don't know our history, you don't know what we've been through, and you don't know what we've been fighting for centuries. Black Americans, FBA, Solon, American Indians, whichever title, because I know. But anyway, have been fighting for reparations since 1865. We filed petitions, we organized marches, we sued corporations, institutions, governments. We bled for this because this is our land. But every time we got close, they shut us down. Jim Crow, redlining, mass incarcerations, the destruction of Black Wall Street, the assassination of our leaders, the destruction of our towns, literally burned down entire towns. The erasure of our indigenous history, they built new laws to try to keep us down, blocked every path, till this day, to make sure we couldn't get what was owed to us. So before you get up here and say Black Americans aren't doing anything, we've been putting in the work for centuries. We've been fighting for centuries. The problem is, though, they made sure that we couldn't win. So for someone else to try to step in and take credit for the fight we've been fighting all along, that's not solidarity. That's scamming, to be quite frank. So for Ghana to use our suffering to fund their agendas, because mind you, they're seeking reparations for Africa, for the continent, for their leaders, for their governments. So assuming that our ancestors were taken from Africa and that we still belong to Africa, assuming that gives them the right to seek reparations on behalf of my ancestors, those same ancestors that built America from the ground up, we're the descendants that still living with the consequences today of what this country did to Black Americans, our Black indigenous ancestors. But y'all want the reparations to go to Africa? Because Ghana's whole argument is that their continent was also a victim of the transatlantic slave trade narrative. Now you can pause the passage and read through. Here's the other part. So yeah, we're against another continent trying to claim what's rightfully ours. And now I do agree with them trying to make slavery a crime against humanity. I get that. However, the African Union doesn't speak for us. Because if that was the case, if all Black Americans so-called was taken from Africa, why y'all didn't come looking for us? Where was the wars for us? The fight, Africa, huh? Where was the wars for helping us, freeing us? Because we had to free ourselves, literally. The white team man didn't free us. We freed ourselves because we made slavery so unmanageable, they had no choice but to free us. Do you know how many wars and revolts on the continent of North America alone that led up to our freedom? And not once was y'all like, let me go help free our African kin in America. Which makes me even believe even more that y'all not like us and we not like y'all, and the whole transatlantic slave trade narrative is something entirely different. So many wars and revolts and rebellions on this continent, but no wars and rebellions or revolts in the continent of Africa leading up to the transatlantic slave trade, right? But let's get back to the topic at hand. What Ghana and the African Union needs to be worrying about is why they still have slavery in their countries. Leave us alone. And lastly, I just want to address the other comments, because there's a lot of comments saying that, oh, so are y'all indigenous or are y'all FBA? Let me just address this really quickly, because it'll take a whole nother video if I go into detail. And y'all already know how I feel about those titles. We are the same people that represent different time periods in America. And a lot of my FBAs, y'all still believe in the transatlantic slave trade narrative. I get it. But at the end of the day, slavery still happened here in America. Whether it be from us being prisoners of war, whether it be from some of my people still thinking we was enslaved in Africa and brought over here, either which way you look at it, our ancestors still endured the atrocities of slavery here in America. Jim Crow, the systematic enslavement of our people that we are still living with today. So why is the African Union trying to seek reparations on the suffering of my ancestors that suffered here in America? Can you answer that?
The UN just voted to view slavery as the gravest crime against humanity. And guess what? 3 people voted no. You want to guess who those 3 are? The proposal was adopted with 123 votes in favor and 3 against. The United States, Israel, and Argentina. 52 countries abstained, including United Kingdom and the European Union member states. So all the members of EU abstained from voting. England abstained from voting. A bunch of countries abstained from voting. The rest of the world voted yes. 123 countries voted yes. That is the worst crime against humanity. USA, Israel, and Argentina said no, it's not the worst crime against humanity, and they voted no. Unlucky enough for them, 123 people voted yes, so the resolution was adopted. You know me, I gotta be an asshole. This is a blow to interracial relationships, because guess what, black women? Y'all be coming on the internet talking a lot of shit. Now the world has voted that the worst thing that has been done to you is from white men. Let's go and see how you gonna make this one up. Oh, white pasta lobster. They loved us during slavery, black men. I know. 2023. That was the whole narrative, that somehow black men and white women were the ones that made slavery that bad. That was how much y'all wanted white men. I gotta be the asshole to remind y'all of that shit. So now they've ruled the worst fucking thing to happen to mankind was slavery. Let me see y'all go try to explain this one out, how black men are worse.
Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys have seen all of that videos and all of that clips that I have for you guys. One thing some Africans, Caribbeans, other races that are not white fail to understand is the fact that we and black Americans are one. Yeah. And another thing they fail to understand is every single thing that you want to talk about today, every single thing you think you have achieved from your own strength, from your own power, from your own race, is started from the effort of black Americans. It's as simple as ABCD, whether you accept it or not. That's just the honest truth. Now, long before now, black Americans have literally been talking about reparation. A lot of foundational black Americans, indigenous black Americans have literally been screaming, shouting about reparations. And they keep saying, and I keep saying in their videos, if slave owners were given reparations, if slave owners were settled, why can't black Americans that have gone through slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, name whatsoever they have gone through, why have they not been able to get their own quota? Right? Long before even Africans started talking about reparations too. And let's be honest, a lot of African leaders during that particular era benefited from slavery. A lot of the benefit they have during that slavery, some of their generation is still enjoying it up till date. Some of their generation is still relying on the wealth up till date. Some of their generations or their descendants that are current now alive are still enjoying. Do you get? So when I saw Africans started talking about, oh, Africans also need slavery, I was not too interested in that aspect. I was interested in the fact that even up till now, even up till date, it is just recent last week that it has been passed that the UN has agreed that that is the grievous crime against humanity. And of which, as far as I'm concerned, that is a shame to all leaders. It is a shame to the UN body itself. Because we should know that that is one of the biggest crime against humanity, even without being told. So I was happy when that particular law was being passed. But when I started hearing talking about reparations, and I was also checking other African leaders that needed to speak about it, but the only country I was seeing was Ghanaians, right? Before 3 countries, Argentina, Israel, and US said, no, you guys are not going to be giving reparation, and of which I really do not care. right? But my own problem is, why do this woman need to bring FBAs into it? Why hitting her chest and being, oh, it's the Caribbean, oh, Haitian, blah, blah, blah. What have the FBAs done? What have your president done? What have your this done? Last time I checked, it is not just one country that opposed. And out of, I think, 123 countries that voted for it, I think there were also a lot of countries that did not say yes or no. They didn't put their hand. They didn't cast any vote. No yes, no no. So why is it that when issues like this tends to pop up, we only try to channel our energies to Black Americans? We always try to drag Black Americans into what they are not even supposed to be dragged into. We always try to make Black Americans look like they are failure. We always try to make Black Americans look like they don't know what they are doing. It's bad. Can we just learn to respect each other? Can we learn not to step on people's toe when people are not stepping on our toes? Most of the videos I see about Black Americans talking about, even when the reparation was coming up, was just literally, Africans want reparations. Let's see what's going to happen. I also did that video on my TikTok. I was like, oh, wow, Africans are now coming out as well for reparation. But remember that before African came out, Black Americans were advocating for reparations. So let's quit. Let's quit making Black Americans feel so uncomfortable. As if they are your problem. They are not your problem. You are the problem that you have. You are the issue that is wrong with you as an African, as a Caribbean. I'm going to say that with my full chest. So the earlier you work on yourself, you work on your mentality, you work on your research skills, I think the better. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm sorry if I'm roughing on anyone's shoulder. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Do it, subscribe, like this video, drop me your comment, and lastly, do not forget to share. And I want to know your take on all of this. I want to say a very big thank you to every single one of you that have been supporting this channel, liking, commenting, dropping super thanks, and also joining my membership. I do not take you guys for granted. You guys are absolutely the best. And yes, guys, with that being said, with no further ado, I do like I always say in my videos, I'm going to be Simba, and I'll see you guys in my next one. For now, bye guys. I love you guys. Mwah.